I've noticed we're losing subscribers. Not the YouTube kind, but the kind that swore they'd be in my life forever. Funny how that works. One day you're surrounded by people who claim to love you, and the next, you're watching them walk away like you were just another phase in their lives. By the way, if you're here, do me a favor, subscribe. It's free, and unlike some people in my life, you won't regret sticking around. My dad fought for me, and he wasn't backing down. Kevin, my stepfather, disgusts me. He is controlling, condescending, and the most insufferable man I have ever met. Ever since he married my mother, my life has spiraled into a nightmare. It wasn't always like this. 3 years ago, my parents got divorced, and honestly, I wasn't surprised. They fought constantly, never really got along, and tried to force a marriage that was doomed from the start. My dad worked hard to provide for us, but my mom? She had other priorities. She was supposed to be a stay-at-home parent, but she barely did anything that came with that role. Cooking? Cleaning? Helping me with my homework? No. Instead, she was glued to her phone, obsessed with becoming some kind of beauty influencer. She spent hours recording videos, posting pictures, and desperately trying to grow a following that barely existed. And when she wasn't online, she was out spending my dad's money, shopping, brunching, getting beauty treatments. She was more invested in her reflection than in me. She didn't care about my grades or my well-being. What mattered to her was making sure I looked perfect, so I wouldn't embarrass her image. When my parents divorced, they split custody, and for a while things were okay. I was getting used to the new arrangement when suddenly, out of nowhere, my mom introduced him. Kevin. She was obsessed with him from the moment they met. Within days they were officially dating, and within weeks she was forcing me to spend time with him. He went from a stranger to an unavoidable part of my life overnight. And he expected me to just accept him as my new father, just like that. But Kevin is nothing like my dad. From the start, he tried to control me. He criticized everything I did. The way I dressed, the way I talked, the way I even existed in my own home. He had 2 sons, and he made it clear he preferred them over me. If I wore a dress or a skirt, he'd scoff and tell me I was too girly. He even tried to dictate how I wore my hair, demanding I keep it in a bun at all times. And it didn't stop there. Whenever I had friends over, he always found a reason to interrupt. He would barge in, hovering, acting like he was just checking in. But it was never quick. He lingered, listened in, made us all uncomfortable. If I told him to give us space, he'd laugh it off, saying, "Girls need supervision." Oh, but his sons? They had total freedom. He never questioned where they went, what they did, or who they were with. The double standard was unbearable. I tried to talk to my mom. I begged her to listen. But instead of helping me, she dismissed everything I said. And that's when things got even worse. Because when I finally reached my breaking point and called my dad for help, my mother tried to make me lie. CPS got involved. And that's when I realized just how far she was willing to go to protect him, at my expense. I tried. I really did. Despite Kevin's constant control, despite his sons bullying me endlessly, despite my mother acting as if I was just some inconvenience in her new, perfect life, I still tried. I followed his ridiculous house rules. I let go of the little freedoms I used to have. I even bit my tongue when my mother told me I needed to give Kevin a chance because she loved him. I tried to make peace. But it was never enough. Kevin's sons invaded my personal space like they owned the place. They mocked me, teased me, made me feel small at every opportunity. And instead of defending me, my mother just laughed it off. "That's how siblings bond," she said. Siblings? I never asked for this. I never asked for them. And Kevin? He didn't just want control over my life, he wanted my father's place too. He demanded I call him Dad. Every time I tried, the word tasted bitter on my tongue. I already had a father. A father who actually loved me. A father who would never treat me like an afterthought. But Kevin didn't care. He acted like my real dad didn't exist. Worse than that, my mother acted like I didn't exist. After she married Kevin, it became painfully obvious where her priorities lay. She spent more time with his sons than she ever did with me. Helped them with schoolwork, cooked for them, fussed over them, things she never did for me. I watched her become the mother I had always wanted, just not for me. I wanted to live with my dad. I begged to live with my dad. But his new job took him to another city, and even though he visited whenever he could, I was stuck with my mother full-time. He knew what I was going through. He tried to help. He tried to reason with her. But every time he brought it up, she shut him down. Stay out of my marriage. She wasn't interested in hearing how I felt. She had already made her choice. I kept telling myself that if I just waited it out, things would change. That maybe, just maybe, she'd see me again. That Kevin and his sons would stop treating me like an outsider in my own home. Then, for the first time in forever, something good actually happened. Kevin got a promotion. He came home beaming, announcing that we were all going on a family trip. He and my mother picked the destination, booked the tickets, planned everything. For once, I felt a flicker of excitement. Maybe this trip would be a turning point. Maybe this was my chance to finally feel like part of the family. But then the accident happened. The day before our vacation, my mother and I were driving home from shopping for clothes when a car slammed into us from behind. It wasn't a terrible crash, but it was enough. Enough to change everything. The crash should have been a wake-up call. I was hurt, badly. My mother and I had been in a car accident, and while she walked away with just a few bruises, I wasn't as lucky. A broken arm. A concussion. The doctor said I needed to stay in the hospital for a few days for observation. It wasn't an option. It wasn't up for debate. I had to stay. But Kevin didn't care. When he arrived at the hospital, I thought, maybe he was there because he was worried about me and my mother. For a brief moment, I believed he actually cared. But then he opened his mouth. Instead of asking how I was, instead of making sure I was okay, he started talking about the trip. Would we still be able to go? Would the money he spent on the tickets go to waste? Would it be too late to cancel? I was lying in a hospital bed, hurting, scared, exhausted, and all he cared about was his precious vacation. I wasn't surprised, but I was disgusted. Then, just when I thought it couldn't get worse, Kevin turned to my mother. The trip is already booked, he reminded her. We're already losing money. There's no point in wasting even more by staying here. And then, the worst part. Kevin looked at me. Looked me right in the eye and said, "At your age, you should be able to stay in a hospital alone for a few days." Like I was some kind of burden. Like I was just in the way. The truth is, I was scared. I didn't want to be alone in a hospital with no family by my side. I was in pain. I was vulnerable. I needed someone. I needed my mom. And for a moment, just a moment, she hesitated. She knew what Kevin was saying was wrong. She even tried to defend me, tried to say she should stay. But Kevin didn't let up. He kept pushing. Kept saying there was no reason for her to waste time sitting beside me all day doing nothing. That I'd be fine. That the hospital had doctors and nurses 24/7, so why did it matter? And in the end, she caved. Of course she did. She always caved to Kevin. She spent one night with me. Just one. I foolishly thought that after seeing me in that hospital bed, vulnerable and hurting, she'd realize how much I needed her. But the next day, Kevin arrived bright and early to pick her up, eager to start his vacation. And she left. She left me there. Alone. The moment she walked out of that hospital room, I felt my heart break. I cried. I cried so hard I could barely breathe. A nurse saw me and gently asked if she could call someone for me. I almost told her no, because who? Who did I have? But then I gave her my father's number. A part of me expected him to brush it off like Kevin did. To tell me I was being dramatic. That it wasn't a big deal. But when he answered and the nurse explained what was happening, his tone changed instantly. I had never heard him sound so angry. So furious. He asked if my mother had really left me alone in the hospital. I told him everything. How Kevin convinced her to go on the trip. How he made it seem like my feelings didn't matter. How they had both abandoned me. And then, my dad said something that sent a chill down my spine. Your mother told me it was just a little fender bender. That you were fine. She lied. She didn't tell him about my broken arm. Or my concussion. Or the fact that she had left me. She lied to his face. I could hear the rage simmering in my father's silence. Then he simply said, "I'm coming. I'm coming right now." I had never felt such relief in my life. For the first time since the accident, I wasn't alone. My father cared. He dropped everything and drove straight to me. Within 2 hours, he was at the hospital, rushing through the door. The second I saw him, I broke down. He hugged me, told me it was okay, told me he was here. And then he went straight to my doctors. He made sure he understood everything about my injuries. He was relieved when they assured him I would be okay, but I could tell, he was furious. Not at me. At Kevin. And my mother. At the people who were supposed to care for me and didn't. He tried calling them. Neither of them answered. And that only made him angrier. He wasn't going to let this go. And for the first time in years, I finally felt like I mattered to someone. My father vowed that Kevin and my mother wouldn't get away with what they did. For the next 2 nights, he stayed by my side, never leaving me alone for a second. He took time off work, put everything on hold, because to him, I mattered. He didn't just see me as an inconvenience. He saw me as his child. When the doctors finally released me, my father wasn't about to send me back to Kevin's house, where I'd be stuck with a babysitter until my mother returned. Instead, he insisted that I stay with him. And for the first time in a long time, I agreed without hesitation. The moment we got to his house, my dad tried calling my mother again. This time she picked up. She claimed she had missed his calls because she was having too much fun with Kevin and his sons. That was the last straw. Hearing that sent my father over the edge. He didn't hold back. He told her exactly what he thought. That what she did was unacceptable. That leaving her own child in a hospital alone for the sake of a vacation wasn't just selfish, it was neglect. And he wasn't going to let it slide. He made it very clear that if she thought she could just brush this under the rug, she was wrong. He was ready to take legal action. If it came down to it, he would take her to court. And if that meant she lost custody of me, so be it. The fallout was immediate. My phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Call after call. Message after message. From both my mother and Kevin. But not to apologize. Not even close. Instead of admitting what they did was wrong, instead of showing even a shred of remorse, they blamed me. They said I had ruined their vacation. That I had made things worse by getting my father involved. That if I had just kept my mouth shut and stayed in the hospital quietly, none of this would have happened. Kevin even had the audacity to say, "You could have just stayed put and not caused a scene." Like I was the problem. Like they weren't the ones who abandoned me in a hospital bed. For so long I had let things slide. I had let them treat me like I didn't matter, thinking that one day it would change. But it never did. Looking back now, I can't believe I put up with it for so long. Kevin had always tried to ruin my relationship with my father. He constantly talked down about him, calling him a deadbeat and a loser, just because my dad wasn't rich like Kevin. My mom? She never told him to stop. Whenever I brought up issues, how Kevin treated me, how I felt left out, he dismissed me. Told me I was too sensitive. That I was exaggerating. Because I was a girl. Because I wasn't one of his sons. Kevin always prioritized his boys. If they needed money? No problem. But if I asked for anything, even if it was my own father's money, Kevin would interrogate me like I was some kind of criminal. He made me feel guilty for simply existing in his home. Family outings? Dinners? Vacations? They made plans without me all the time. Their excuse? "Oh, we didn't want to bother you." As if I wasn't part of the family. Even on my birthday they barely made an effort. Kevin would say, "My sons don't make a big deal about birthdays, so why should you?" Like I wasn't allowed to have something special. And when I struggled with school, instead of support, Kevin just rolled his eyes and called me lazy. My mother? She stayed silent. Like she always did. But this time? I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. CPS gets involved. My father wasn't playing around. He reported them to CPS. It wasn't an easy decision for him. But he couldn't just let this go. He wouldn't let them get away with treating me like I didn't matter. A few days after my mother and Kevin returned home, they got the call. CPS wanted answers. They had to explain why they left a minor alone in the hospital. They had to answer for their neglect. And guess what? The authorities agreed with my father. Leaving me behind like that wasn't just selfish, it was dangerous. And for once, they couldn't just sweep it under the rug. My mother's true colors. After that, my mother finally called me. Not to ask if I was okay. Not to apologize. She was furious. Not because of what she did, but because I told someone about it. She blamed me for the trouble she and Kevin were in. She said that by involving CPS, I had made things so much worse. But the worst part? She told me that when CPS called, I needed to lie. She begged me to say it wasn't a big deal. She even tried to guilt-trip me. She said, "I gave you years of my life. Now you have to prove your loyalty to me." Loyalty. Like I owed her something for simply being my mother. But what really disgusted me? She wasn't even worried about me. She was worried about Kevin. She was terrified that this would cause problems for him. That his ex-wife would find out. That he would have to deal with the consequences. She wasn't scared for me. She was scared for him. That was it. That was the moment I finally saw the truth. She didn't care about me. She never did. And I was done pretending that she did. I told her flat out. I wasn't going to lie. I wasn't going to cover for her. I wasn't going to protect her from the consequences of her own actions. She screamed at me, called me names. But I didn't care. I refused to back down. Moving forward. It's been 2 weeks since then. I told CPS everything. The truth. And now, I'm staying with my dad. Where I'm actually wanted. Where I don't have to beg to be seen. For the first time in a long time. I finally feel safe. A new chapter begins. It's been 4 months since I moved in with my dad, and I still can't believe how much my life has changed. For the first time in years, I don't feel like I have to walk on eggshells. I don't have to question my worth. I don't have to constantly fight for a place in my own family. With my dad, I feel safe. I feel heard. I feel wanted. He's been helping me look at school so I can live with him permanently, and honestly, it feels right. I don't wake up every day dreading the next moment. I don't feel like I have to shrink myself to fit into someone else's life. Instead, I exist, fully, freely. And that's something I never had before. CPS held them accountable. As for my mother, CPS didn't let her off the hook. She received an official warning. They made it clear that what she did was not okay. She had abandoned her responsibility to me, and there was no brushing it under the rug this time. They required her to attend parenting classes and counseling to address the damage she had done, not just to me but to herself. Kevin wasn't spared either. CPS questioned him, pointing out how he had completely disregarded my well-being, especially after the hospital incident. They told both of them that if I ever stayed with them again, they would be watching. And if they ever pulled something like this again, there would be real consequences. Finding myself again. 4 months. 4 months of peace. 4 months of rediscovering who I am without constantly being told I'm too much or not enough. I've been able to focus on my studies and take care of my mental health without the constant stress of living under Kevin's rules. I started making new friends, real friends. People who actually want me around, who laugh with me, who listen when I talk. And last month, I had a real birthday for the first time in years. I invited my friends over, we ordered way too much pizza, and we stayed up all night watching the cheesiest, most ridiculous romantic movies we could find. It wasn't extravagant. It wasn't expensive. But it was perfect, because for the first time ever, I felt celebrated. My mother's regrets. Lately, my mother has been reaching out more. She sends texts about how sorry she is, about how much she misses me. And I won't lie, part of me wants to believe her. Part of me wants to let her back in. But then I remember all the nights I felt invisible in that house. I remember every time she chose Kevin over me. I remember sitting in that hospital bed, alone, abandoned, while she was off having fun. She says she's sorry. But sorry isn't enough. I made it clear to her, I'm not ready to go back. And honestly, I don't know if I ever will be. If she really wants a relationship with me, she has to prove that she's changed. She has to accept full responsibility for what she did. Until then, I've set my boundaries. I refuse to let guilt or obligation pull me back into a situation that broke me. As for Kevin, I haven't heard from him. He hasn't apologized. He hasn't even acknowledged what he did. And honestly, I expected nothing less. Kevin has never cared about me. And now, I don't care about him either. I will never forget the way he treated me. I will never forgive the way he dismissed me, like I was nothing. I don't care if he ever changes. Because I'm done waiting. Moving forward. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that I can't rely on people who refuse to see me. But I can rely on myself. And I can rely on the people who truly love me, like my dad. For the first time in a long time, I'm not scared of the future. I'm excited for it. Because this is my life now. And I'm finally living it on my own terms. This story is a powerful reminder that family is not just about blood. It's about love, respect, and support. No one deserves to feel unwanted in their own home. No one should have to fight for the love and care that should be given freely. If someone continuously disregards your feelings, belittles your worth, or makes you feel like an outsider in your own family, you have every right to walk away. Sometimes, choosing yourself is the hardest but most necessary decision. And that's okay. The lesson here? Know your worth. Set your boundaries. Never let guilt keep you in a place where you are not valued. Does this story resonate with you? Have you ever felt like you were pushed aside or treated unfairly by family? Do you relate to this story in any way? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your experiences in the comments. Let's start a conversation and support each other. And if you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like, share, and comment. You never know who might need to hear this today.